I've been working on a series of illustrations I term streamsonas, which revolves around giving popular streamers/online personalities SMT-style personas, since streamers have to essentially play a character, an entertainer with some more outlandish and fictional than others. It's pretty similar to having a persona, because it's the guise which you use to face the world. The streamsona in question today was designed for Totalbiscuit, with this video being an art process commentary. It's been a while since I made something quasi-serious. So, without further ado, let's get started.
Blue days, hot tops, with my blue face, ice pops.
So usually when I start a new sketch page or if I'm feeling a little rusty, I'll begin with a load of scribbles and try to see something within the chaos. It doesn't necessarily have to make any logical sense. The idea of this exercise is to just get my brain working. I don't follow the scribbles line for line all the time, they're more of an indication of flow which I use to creatively bullshit over. I guess that's one way to put it. You can see here I decided to follow a vertical cluster of lines and ended up drawing a stylized male torso. I know a lot of artists like to have layers where they draw in a different color and it acts as a construction skeleton, which they'll then ink over, but I'm really lazy, so I like to constantly Ctrl Z a lot until I get the line I want. In a traditional setting where I can't undo mistakes, I'll just ghost movements a lot to try and image the line before I draw it, and overall I'm just more methodical and reserved. But the overall process it's still the same thing. You don't get magically better just because you're using a PC. Here you can see that I'm doing the same thing as before, but for a female torso. I really enjoy drawing human anatomy. You'll see this all over my sketch pages. I just doodle heads and isolated body parts when I can't think of anything else. I also enjoy breaking the rules that I've learned, stretching and mashing different body parts, just putting them in boxes and areas that you probably shouldn't be putting them in. That sounds weird. I decided to keep the warm-up footage in this video so you guys can see as much of the artistic process as possible from beginning to end. And also to artificially elongate this video for that sweet ad revenue. I don't get money for this, I just think 10 minutes is a nice number, it's a nice round number. I'm doing the OK sign in my hand right now, you can't see that, but I'll draw myself doing that so you can see that. So after the warm-up I started looking at photos of TB to try and figure out what his standout facial landmarks were. I'm not trying to achieve an exact likeness, rather just identify key aspects of his face to get something recognizable as TB. With each iteration I get a better and clearer idea of what I want. Once I've decided what angle of face I want, I build on that idea and incorporate elements like his trademark top hat. I initially started this line art when I heard of his retirement announcement, and him hanging his hat up just seemed like a pretty apt symbol. Moving on to the persona idea, TB had a soft spot for Warhammer, and looking through what I know about the universe, that sounds really deep and profound. I thought that the Emperor was a great fit for his stoic personality and strong stance against a lot of anti-consumer practices in the gaming industry. Also, the whole part of the lore where the Emperor ascends to the Golden Throne to lead the Imperium, defending them against the forces of chaos. That drew a pretty cool parallel to his living situation. I looked at a lot of past renditions of the Emperor to get an idea of what the public believe he looks like, and took a couple of design motifs. Of course, the two-headed eagle Aquila adorns a lot of his armor and weapons, and we have the trademark gigantic pauldrons that are signature to the Warhammer franchise. I didn't make them quite as obscenely, ridiculously large as they are in a lot of other illustrations. I was going for a slightly more streamlined, functional look, although, I don't know, maybe that's not lore-friendly. I guess you could call it the Emperor's casual wear. So in looking through a lot of the Warhammer designs, especially in recent redesigns, the Emperor always has an element of asymmetry. Like in one hand he'll have his flaming sword and in the other it'll be a mechanized power eagle claw or something like that. So I decided to reflect that by having this large sort of armored arm while having the other one be relatively bare. The pauldrons also have some element of asymmetry added to them by having this badge, say on the left shoulder, which I eventually replaced with a Union Jack. At this point, all of the hard parts of the illustration are done. The silhouetting is done, the composition has been set. Now I'm just thinking how I can improve the overall flow of the image. So I'll zoom out and pause now and again. You'll see me doing it in just a sec, yeah, like here. Yes, I'm thinking right now, I'm considering my options. Or maybe I went to take a dump. I mean, it's one of the two. This iron chain that I'm adding right now is the result of me noticing that a lot of my cape lines are leading the eye towards the lower right, towards our figure John Bane. So I figured it would emphasize that effect further. I'll leave it to you to decide whether or not that actually worked. You might have noticed we're fast forwarding quite a lot here, as I don't record every little thing I do, because sometimes I just want to concentrate and turn OBS off. And also because sometimes I'm a bit of a dumb and forget to record what I'm working on. All I really did was block out the shapes and background. A general rule I try to follow is contrasting foreground and background, even if the background itself is just one block color. In this case, the colors in the foreground are warm and saturated, so the background is cool and desaturated. Now in a moment you'll see some rapid flickering. There you go. That was me using the sliders to try and fix the contrast and saturation, which in hindsight was a bad idea. It ended up pushing the dark colors all the way to a desaturated black. You don't usually want pure computer generated black in a color painting like this because it's just not something you see in reality, so it looks kind of off. Even paintings with exceptional amounts of shadow tend to resort to a dark blue-grey rather than black. I think I've sort of got away with it in the end after I lightened and messed around further with the blending, but it's definitely not something I'd do again. It's better to get your colors right the first time. To be honest, painting is my biggest weakness right now. Since I spent so much of my time in the past just doing line art, it really shows here. I muddy my colors around a lot and don't have great brush economy. But that's why I'm making an effort to paint, so I can overcome that weakness and become better in the future. This part of the painting process is kind of just boring light rendering stuff, so I'll take just a little bit of time to talk about Totalbiscuit for anyone who doesn't really know him. He was the champion of video game critique in that he elevated the standard of content that was being produced at the time. He ran a World of Warcraft show from 2005 to 2010, and from then on I believe he started doing YouTube video game commentary, and he blew up from there. I discovered him around this time and ended up following for years afterwards. In fact, I'm fairly sure the entire reason I love video games as much as I do now is in large part down to him. I've always played video games my whole life, but TV made me see them in a new light, analysing the mechanics, industry practices, options menus, and of course FOV sliders. We also shouldn't forget that he did this in a generation where everyone had it out for video games, the period where they apparently caused violent crime and ruined relationships. My favourite videos are definitely from his WTF series. The standout ones that come to mind are his Space Marine blind demo playthrough and his look at Metro Last Light. Going back to the art, I felt confident enough now to merge down the line art layer. This is when I start overpainting and smudging them wherever necessary. Sometimes I'll also change the colour of parts of the line work before merging down so it blends better with the block colours. I actually just made a mistake there and started blocking the chains before doing some render on the arm. You want to avoid doing that so your paint strokes aren't fragmented between the sections. Now I know I could probably have solved this if I split them into separate layers, but again I'm really lazy and I just like everything on one layer, so I just overpainted it. Another issue I commonly struggle with is getting those skin tones right. I have this horrible habit of just making everyone way too orange and just going too saturated. It was way worse in the past though. If I had to give a verbal comparison, like current orange levels are akin to fake tans, whereas orange levels from 2 years ago looked more like radioactive Lucozade. It was really bad. What you're looking at is me trying to add some skin tone variation, bringing in more cool colors towards the purple and blues, while also adding more warm tones around places where blood vessels might be closer to the surface. For example, areas like the elbow or around the knuckles. In the grand scheme of things though, color is one of the more flexible areas of art. You can get away with a lot of things. It's the underlying values, how dark and light areas are on your work, that really determine the interpretation of form. At this point, one of the last major things to get done is the face, which uses pretty similar principles to other parts of the body. It's just a matter of knowing where you can get away with tone variation while maintaining something possibly convincing. This is actually a pretty poor example of that. There's not really any tone variation. I was feeling pretty fatigued at this point, but I figured it was important to mention for future reference. As my concentration started to wane, I just devolved into adding wrinkles and scars onto the Emperor's face. I'm not quite sure how that would fit in with the 40k lore, but it is what it is. I also lowered their hairline a bit because that forehead was just massive when I started it. I only noticed it after I painted everything in. This is a pretty common thing. Usually when you paint in something, it just exposes all of the flaws in your original drawing, so it's important to keep in mind that that construction is probably the most important part of any piece. Oh, and while we're on the subject of flaws, here's a quick tip. If you have software that changes your screen RGB output like Flux, for obvious reasons, turn it off while you are painting. I'm fairly sure I must be the only guy that always forgets to do this. I wake up the next day like, oh, all these colors are screwed, I wonder how that happened. So this here is the finished product. I say finished in quotation marks because art is never really finished, it's just abandoned. It was time to move on to something else with what I learned from this piece. I threw on a couple presentation background blocks with an added glow layer around the sword and blue sparkle things, but other than that, you didn't really miss much from the time skip there. Hopefully in a couple months time I'll be able to look back at this process and assess what I've learned and improved on. But yeah, this marks the end of the video. Thanks for watching.
If it wasn't for you.